Elissa Slotkin didn't walk into that confirmation hearing like most senators do. She carried a different weight, the kind that doesn't come from years of political speeches but from years spent deep inside the intelligence world. Long before she was elected to Congress, she served as a CIA officer trained in counterterrorism after the attacks of September 11th. She had worked in war zones, analyzed the behavior of militias, tracked down extremists, and lived through the harsh reality of what happens when governments fail to act on warnings. That kind of background makes her different from many of her colleagues, and it showed the moment she began questioning Kristi Noem. This wasn't a routine exchange about party politics or ideology.
Thanks for being here, and thanks for our time in my office. Governor, I'm a former CIA officer, joined right after 9/11, and served 3 tours in Iraq alongside the military. I'm actually the first CIA officer in the Senate. To me, the most important thing, again, as a Democrat from a state that Trump won, right, on the same ballot, we both won, I understand we're going to have different policy opinions. I certainly understand that the president or incoming president has the right to nominate whoever he wants. Those are not the issues for me that I'm going to spend my time on. The ones that I care about the most relate to the mission of the organization when it was founded, protecting the homeland. And I think, to me, it's one thing when there's campaign rhetoric or politicization of things. Everyone does that on both sides of the aisle in this committee and in our line of work. But when it comes to actually protecting the country, you do have to be clear and honest about facts and not conflate things. So it's just important to me that I know, particularly since you do have one of the intelligence agencies within the Department of Homeland Security, that you're going to call a spade, right? The most recent acts of domestic terrorism in New Orleans, horrible incident, in Nevada, had nothing to do with migrants, correct?
Correct.
They were homegrown American citizens. One of them was actually in a very elite military unit. I mean, it's horrible. It's one of the hardest things to catch, the sort of lone wolf, radicalized American citizen. But I want to protect ourselves. Our most recent examples of domestic terrorism were not what we've spent the majority talking about today, crime from a migrant. And I don't dispute there is crime. But I just want to know, and I want to hear from you as an intelligence officer, that you're going to speak about real threats and not blow something up, politicize something, make something more exciting, because that's maybe what the president wants to hear. But your mission to protect and defend the Constitution means calling honestly what the threats are to the country. Can you just give me a yes or no, please?
Yes, Senator, I will be as transparent and factual every day with you and the American people as possible based on the information that I have. I don't know if the investigations are closed in New Orleans and in Nevada, but what we know so far and needs to be relayed to the American people needs to be the truth and facts.
Yeah, I'd ask that. We've talked a lot about border security. As a CIA officer, I think one of the only people on this committee who's actually worked on protecting the homeland. I'm a Middle East terrorism and militia expert by training, so I believe deeply in it. And every country of the world gets to decide who comes inside its borders. That's not a radical concept. But I think I've been open with this committee that it is also on us to fix the deeply broken legal immigration system. I'm glad to hear that you're going to carry out the laws on the immigration system. Democrats and Republicans are to blame that we haven't fixed this system. But I also believe you can't fully control the border unless you give people that we need for our companies, for our economy, a legal vetted way to come here. So do you believe in legal vetted immigration and that we need more of it in the United States?
I do believe we need to follow our legal immigration laws and that it needs to be vetted. We need more resources, I believe, in some of the elements of this to ensure.
Do you believe that our economy depends and needs some level, just like your family came from Norway and on economic, drive and wanted a better life?
Immigration's always been a part of our history and will be a part of our future. We just need to make sure that we're adhering to our nation's laws, which this body has the ability to.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
Continue to change and to put in place.
again, going back to the fact that you will pledge an oath to the Constitution, not to President Trump, just like every other nominee. President Trump said in November that he is willing to use law enforcement, National Guard, or even active duty military to go after, quote, the threat from within the United States. I don't know exactly what he was talking about. But we have recent examples from your predecessors at DHS where federal law enforcement were sent into a state, in this case Oregon, without coordination with the governor. Those federal law enforcement officers at the time were putting down threats to federal buildings, and they were legitimate threats. I don't dispute there was destruction of property going on during a bunch of protests and riots. So I don't dispute that, but they weren't wearing insignia. We talked about this. They weren't wearing any markings. So people were arrested by folks in fatigues with no names, no idea who they were, like right out of a bad Hollywood movie, okay? If the president asks you to send in federal law enforcement to a state without coordination of that governor, would you support that action?
You know, Senator, my job, if nominated and sworn in as Secretary of Homeland Security, is to uphold the Constitution and to uphold the rules of this country. Yes, that will be the oath and the pledge that I will be making. And my goal also is to work with you to ensure that we have situations that are always appropriate, that we are well defined.
I just need to know, you're a former governor. You can imagine that if Joe Biden sent in 700 federal law enforcement under Secretary Mayorkas without coordinating with you, I think we can agree you'd be a little upset. So I just ask that you give the same respect for coordination, and that we are very sensitive. People are worried about politicizing of law enforcement and the uniformed military. That's a bad thing. I hope we can agree. Lastly, I will just say, look forward to looking at the northern border, the Gordie Howe Bridge, your help staffing that. We know you aren't, right now, across many administrations, we haven't met our staffing goals at DHS, and that's a problem, so we really want to make sure that opens on time. But I also want your assurances, you know, you received FEMA assistance from Joe Biden's administration, right? You had historic floods, you asked and requested of the administration, and you were given millions of dollars to help with that. I understand you don't like Gavin Newsom, but can you say in front of the American people that you will open the books to this committee, who does have oversight over FEMA, right? That you will open the books in a bipartisan way to ensure, whether it's North Carolina or California or anywhere in between, that the American people can know that you are not playing politics with disaster assistance?
Yes, Senator, I'll work with you in this committee to make sure I'm following the federal law and ensuring that you have information and transparency from us and from DHS and FEMA.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yield back.
Senator Langford.
Governor Noem, great to see you.
Great to see you, too.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for accepting this nod that the president has given you. For Brian, thanks. Both of you, you've walked through a lot. I have had the privilege of knowing you for a very long time.
It was a sharp interrogation from someone who has looked real threats in the eye, asking if a nominee for one of the most powerful security positions in the nation could separate truth from politics. Slotkin's questions landed with precision because she didn't waste time with platitudes. She went straight to the heart of the matter, demanding something that should have been simple but in practice is far too rare: honesty. She asked whether Noem would call things as they are without bending facts to fit a political agenda, without twisting intelligence reports into campaign slogans. That opening request, "just call a spade," might sound small, but it set the tone. In that hearing room, Slotkin was laying down a marker. She was saying that the job of the Secretary of Homeland Security is not to play politics, not to bend to the will of a president or party, but to safeguard the country by telling the truth. And from there she built her case piece by piece. One of the first places she aimed her spotlight was domestic terrorism. Slotkin reminded everyone listening that the most recent acts of mass violence in the country weren't carried out by migrants crossing a border, they were carried out by American citizens, people radicalized here at home. One of those attackers wasn't just another troubled individual, he had served in an elite military unit trained by the United States government and then turned that training against his own people. That chilling detail underscored her entire argument. It's not enough to pour billions into border walls and security checkpoints if the bigger threat is already living within the nation's borders. For intelligence professionals like Slotkin, that's not a theory. It's a reality that keeps them awake at night. And yet, as she pointed out, the political conversation often drifts elsewhere. Politicians prefer to focus on immigration because it's visible, because it's easy to dramatize, and because it stirs emotions that translate into votes. But Slotkin insisted the committee be honest. The threats we face most often come not from the outside but from within. Still, she didn't dismiss the border, far from it. She acknowledged that controlling who enters the country matters deeply, but she argued that border enforcement alone doesn't solve the problem. You can station thousands of agents, build miles of walls, and pour endless money into high-tech surveillance, but none of that addresses the deeper issue. Without a functioning legal immigration system, pressure at the border will always remain high. Slotkin's perspective was shaped by the reality that economies need workers, farms need labor, healthcare facilities need staff, and businesses need talent. Families will always try to reunite, and people seeking opportunity will always look toward the United States. Her point was clear: until there's a legal vetted way for those people to enter the country, no amount of border enforcement will truly fix the problem. It was a nuanced position, not easy to sell in a soundbite, but grounded in the hard lessons of governance and security. Then the conversation took a darker turn. Slotkin raised the issue of federal power being used against what was vaguely described as threats within. That phrase is dangerous because it's so open-ended, capable of being twisted to mean almost anything. History shows that when leaders gain the ability to define threats loosely, it often leads to abuse. Slotkin reminded the committee of what happened not long ago in Portland, Oregon, when federal officers in camouflage uniforms, without insignia, without name tags, detained citizens during protests. To many Americans watching, it looked less like lawful policing and more like scenes from authoritarian regimes, where citizens disappear at the hands of unidentified agents. For a democracy, that imagery is corrosive, and Slotkin knew it. Her questions to Noem cut right into this fear. If asked to deploy forces like that again, would she comply? Would she serve a political command, or would she uphold the Constitution? Because the oath of office, Slotkin reminded her, isn't sworn to a president. It's sworn to the nation's founding document. And in that moment, the stakes of the hearing crystallized. But Slotkin didn't stop with abstract principles. She grounded her questioning in something very tangible: disaster relief. She pointed out that Kristi Noem's own state had once been struck by historic floods, and in that time of crisis, she had requested and received millions of dollars in federal aid from FEMA. That aid came without hesitation because that's what the federal government is supposed to do: help Americans in their time of need, no matter their politics, no matter which party controls the White House. Slotkin's demand was straightforward yet powerful. Would Noem commit to keeping disaster relief fair and impartial, available to every state and every citizen in need, without bias? Or would it be used as a political weapon, a tool to reward allies and punish opponents? The answer to that question mattered because it cut to the heart of trust. When a hurricane, wildfire, or flood destroys lives, people need to believe their government will help, not play favorites. Through every question, Slotkin kept returning to the same underlying theme: truth versus politics. She wasn't interested in party loyalty. She wasn't interested in headline-grabbing slogans. She wanted to know whether the person being considered for one of the most powerful cabinet positions in America understood the gravity of the responsibility. Could she tell the truth even when inconvenient? Could she resist political pressure and respect the rights of states? Could she guarantee that aid and resources would go where they were needed, not where it was politically advantageous? Each of those questions wasn't just about Kristi Noem, they were about the health of American democracy itself. By the time Slotkin finished her round of questioning, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. It was no longer a routine exchange of talking points. It had become a moment of reckoning. Slotkin had forced everyone listening to consider what kind of country the United States risks becoming if its leaders abandon principles in favor of politics. Homeland security is supposed to be about protecting people, not protecting power. It's supposed to be about trust, transparency, and the courage to act on facts rather than on rhetoric. The reminder was clear: democracy doesn't collapse all at once. It crumbles slowly when those in power choose loyalty over law, when they hide inconvenient truths, when they bend institutions to serve political ends. And if that happens, the cost isn't measured in polls or approval ratings. It's measured in lives, in freedoms, in the trust between citizens and their government. What Slotkin did that day was more than question a nominee. She held up a mirror to the system and asked the public to look closely. She asked whether Americans are willing to accept leaders who politicize law enforcement, who treat immigration as a campaign prop rather than a policy challenge, who see disaster relief as a bargaining chip rather than a sacred duty. She asked whether the public will demand better or whether it will allow leaders to erode the guardrails of democracy piece by piece. For those watching, the choice is not abstract, it's immediate and personal. It's about whether you can trust that if a natural disaster strikes your town, aid will come. It's about whether you can believe that law enforcement officers will serve the Constitution and not political whims. It's about whether the threats identified by intelligence agencies will be communicated honestly, or whether they'll be reshaped to fit a partisan narrative. These are not small questions. They determine whether the country remains anchored in its founding principles or drifts into something far more dangerous, and that's why Slotkin's interrogation matters. It wasn't about Kristi Noem's personality, it wasn't about partisan rivalries. It was about the core principles that hold a democracy together: honesty, accountability, fairness, and a willingness to place the Constitution above politics. Those principles are fragile, and they survive only when citizens demand that their leaders live by them. So as viewers reflect on that hearing, the task is not just to listen passively but to think critically. Ask yourself what kind of country we become if truth becomes optional. Ask yourself what happens when loyalty outweighs law. Ask whether disaster aid, border policy, and homeland security can still be trusted to serve people rather than politics. These are not questions that can be brushed aside, they are questions that will shape the future of the nation. And as Slotkin made clear with her unwavering interrogation, the time to demand answers is now. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about one nominee or one hearing, it's about what kind of country we want to live in. One where leaders bend facts to serve power, or one where power bends to serve the truth. One where federal agencies are used as political weapons, or one where they remain tools of protection for every citizen equally. One where disaster aid is handed out to friends and withheld from opponents, or one where every American can count on help in their darkest hour. Those choices are not made only by the people on the stage, they are made by citizens, by the public, by everyone paying attention. That is why Elissa Slotkin's words should resonate long after the hearing ends. They are a warning and a challenge. Democracy, she reminds us, isn't self-sustaining. It requires constant defense, not just from foreign threats, but from the slow erosion of principle at home. The oath of office is not a formality, it is a promise to serve the Constitution above all else. And the question she left hanging in that hearing room is the same question that every American should be asking: can we trust those in power to keep that promise? Or will we look back one day and realize the promise was broken when we weren't paying attention?